Hey guys, it's Flight Level Kai here, and I want to talk to you guys today about my journey through flight school. And the theme today is going to be trust the process. I'm going to repeat that phrase many times throughout this story. So let's begin in August of 2019, right? I went to a university in Florida, and this particular university it offered a bachelor's degree as well as having its own flight school. So this really piqued my interest because I was like, I'll be able to get an undergrad degree and also pursue my flight and my licenses and ratings as well. So I remember going to orientation and for the first 3 days of university, just being so excited for the flight training aspect of it. However, to my surprise, as an international student, I'm required by law to submit documentation and fingerprints to TSA, which I wasn't really aware of until about the first week of classes. And I was only aware because the chief pilot sent an email out. So I wish they told me about that way earlier so I could have sent this documentation in beforehand. But we'll continue on. So this was like one of the first setbacks I saw in my training because I wanted to start flight training as soon as possible. And I saw my peers, getting in the airplane, posting that they're flying. And I was like, I want to experience that. I've never flown an airplane by myself. I wanted to experience that. So before I want to continue, I want to say I went to flight school not knowing anything about aviation. I just knew that I wanted to be a pilot. I knew that I was interested in aviation. So I was aware of the process that it took, but I wasn't aware of like how deep that process went. So as I was learning to become a pilot, I'm learning about the aviation industry as well. And I think that happens for most people, but I know some of my peers, all of them were like, oh, I've been interested in aviation from when I was 5. But I only knew at 17 that I wanted to be in this industry. And I had no one in my family who was a pilot or anything. So around the second week of September of 2019, I submitted documentation and was able to get a hold of a TSA agent. And they came down to the flight school and I was able to be fingerprinted. And this felt like a huge step in progress because it meant that once it was done, I could start flying. However, once the agent was done documentation, he said it can take up to 3 months. And I was like, wow, 3 months of just sitting back and waiting. I mean, even though I was also in university, so I had classes to attend and stuff like that too, right? But I remember during this time, I was annoyed. I kept telling myself, trust the process, trust the process. But I saw all my other peers starting their training and they're telling their stories as a student pilot. And for the TSA documentation, you receive 3 messages. The first one says documents received, then it's documents accepted. And then the last one you receive is permission to begin training. So I remember searching all over on 4 different forums. I searched on Reddit for answers on the exact time I can receive these messages, but they were pretty vague. But TSA would give you little updates on like the home page of the website, and it gives you an update on how long it should take. And you could also send them an email, but they took like 2 weeks to answer the email. So it was just a whole lot. So I remember around October, and I've only received the documents received message at this point, and it felt so long. So I would distract myself, and I was also focusing on my degree. Then around November, and it's Thanksgiving, and I remember staying at school along with some other international students. And the school was virtually empty. It was just international students, and it was a fun time. I remember that. And I remember TSA, the messages weren't on my mind as much. But I remember one day being at the pool, and I just got an email that said documents accepted. And I signed in the TSA, and I was so excited. I was like, hey guys, I'm going to start flying now. I can't wait. And so we were still on Thanksgiving break, so I remember I sent an email. I think the email came on Friday, and on Monday I sent an email to the chief pilot to make sure that he received that documents accepted as well, because immediately after, permission to train it follows. So he responds, and then he said he'll be setting up an instructor very soon. So I was going to my first flight. About 2 weeks went by. The chief pilot, he was in touch with me for those 2 weeks, basically saying he's gonna set me up, he's working on it. And there have been issues with finding an instructor who had the time and who could accept a new student, because mostly everyone was busy, and it was around December. So at this time, it felt like I had so much. I felt like I wasted so much time here, because I was just like, it's it's December. I should have at least had some hours by now, but I have nothing. And I also had a bit of FOMO, I would say. But on the glorious day of December 12th, 2019, I had my very first flight. I'll never forget the feeling. I was nervous, showed up 45 minutes early for my lesson. Just in case there was any hiccups, I met my instructor. We talked about what we were doing, and he said it would be a short flight just to get my feet wet. We went up. He did everything, and once we were in cruise, he gave me the flight controls. I remember I did some climbs, turns, and descents, and I felt a little bit dizzy and slightly nauseous, because it was very bumpy and you feel everything in a 172. Once I was done with the flight, I remember I checked my logbook and I logged 0.3. Which is like 15 minutes. The instructor and we debriefed, and he scheduled my next flight. But my next flight would have had to have been January 2020, because I was full-time university student and I had finished my exams and everything. And I actually booked to go home on the 13th, not knowing that I would have a flight on the 12th. So it kind of felt like I teased myself, because I got 15 minutes of flight time. But again, trust the process. So my next flight was logged in January 17, 2020, right? This was almost 4 weeks since my intro flight. And I remember going home Christmas, and all I could think about is, when can I go back home to train? When can I go back and fly? When can I get back into it? That's always going through my head. I went back to school, I think January 3rd, and I waited almost 2 weeks until I flew again. And I kept telling myself, trust the process, because I felt as though that I should have been flying more. I should be doing more. But I had to be easy on myself and let myself know that, hey, I'm doing so much more. I'm also getting a degree as well. So this, I have to put something first. And fortunately, the bachelor's had to come first, because I was in a school program. Flight school can always be done, but doing them at the same time, much more beneficial. So for 2.5 months, training was going well, and for your information, I was flying in a Part 141 school. I flew about 2 to 3 times a week, sometimes just once a week. I was satisfied and happy with training up until March 2020, and you can know where I'm going with this. The entire world went on lockdown in the span of like 5 days. I remember being in school, and the first email students received was, "You guys can stay here during the pandemic," and we will resume class as normal. And I was like, okay, cool. I can stay here and continue training. I remember literally like a day later, we received the email stating that the university is shutting down because of the global pandemic. Everyone needs to vacate the campus within 3 days. This was a slap in the face, because I had my mindset on staying here and flying, and then, summer's approaching, so I'm like, I could be able to focus on flying and get my PPL during the summer. So that was just blown off course, right? So during the first 2 months of quarantine, and I went back home to the Bahamas. I studied aviation, and I specifically studied for my private pilot written exam, because my instructor told me, hey, work on your written, so when you come back you can just get it done. And so I took that to heart, and through all this I told myself, trust the process. Even though I was home, I can still make efforts to progress my career. After 2 months of studying for my written, I quickly realized there was probably no hope for the world, and that we would be on lockdown indefinitely. So I honestly stopped studying, because I didn't know when I'll be able to get back, and I don't know. I could have been studying for 6 months, 7 months. There was no end goal to my studying, so it's like I'm just studying to study, and I needed something to look forward to. So August of 2020, my university opened its door. They offered online learning as well as in-person. So obviously I went to the in-person learning, right? August 27th, was my first flight back since COVID. I went into training feeling very hopeful. I was like, great, my career is progressing even though the world is going through what it's going through. I can still continue to fly as long as I'm keeping safe and everything. And I remember I took my written October of 2020. I passed with an 83%, and I had my first solo the next month, November 2020. I was so excited because I just conquered two main career goals within the span of 2 months. And so I know that I'll be well on my way to obtaining my PPL because the written is done way beforehand. And even though I missed out on a lot of flying, I think it was like 5 months of flying, or yeah, 5 months, I figured I'll still be okay. Around April of 2021, my instructor left to fly private jets. I'm not sure where he went, but I was happy for him. He was able to advance his career, but he left during a pivotal time of my career. I was ready to do my long cross-country solo, but since he had left, I was placed with another instructor. During this time, it would have been my sophomore junior year because I was also in a 3-year program, so I was in a sophomore/junior year. When my instructor left, about three other instructors also left as well, which left a lot of my peers without an instructor. So I remember not flying up for about a week, and once my instructor left, the flight school was basically in shambles because they had like so many students to replace and move around. But I was placed with a new instructor, and I remember I flew with him, we did maneuvers, he was happy where my progress was at. And then I flew with him about 3 more times. Then he was like, okay, cool. I trust your skill in this airplane. However, I don't have the time to do the long cross country. And the thing is with the long cross country, you have to do it with an instructor first, and then you can do it solo. So, I think I did do the long cross country with that first instructor, and he left right after. So I have to do it again with another instructor. So I flew with another instructor, and then another, and then another, and then summer break came. Then guess what? The flight school closed for the summer because that's when they do their maintenance. And during this time, I really contemplated if flight school was the path for me. It seemed like so many hurdles to jump over until I was able to earn my private. It felt like so much work just to get to this first initial goal, So I flew again in October 2021. After not flying since May 2021, I was placed with a brand new instructor who freshly got his CFI, and I flew along cross country with him November of 2021. The instructor was happy. He was happy with the flight, but because he was new, he wanted me to do the cross country again so he can have extra confidence and confirmation in himself and me, which I thought was so weird. But I was like, you're new, I get it. I'm like your first student, so you want to be sure. And then scheduling for flights became difficult as I flew one more time before the year was out, and then I started flying again in February of 2022. I remember February 2022 instructors were telling me I'm close to my check ride, and that was the motivation I needed. I needed that motivation to continue. I increased the amount of time that I was studying tremendously. I was constantly in my books reading, learning, and understanding aviation. Then March of 2022, I was sent on a solo short cross country, and this is where I started to feel dissatisfied with the flight school because I felt like they were just stringing me along for money. Because there was no reason why. I mean, there was reasons why I couldn't do the long cross country, but it just felt like so much, And so he sent me 3 or 4 short cross countries. So he obviously had no issues with me flying solo. If he constantly sent me to short cross countries, the short and the long ones, there's no difference in them, So April 28th, 2022, that rolls around, right? It was my last flight at this flight school. I called my instructor stating that this will be our last flight together because I won't be training at the flight school anymore. It was also my senior year and graduation was approaching, so things were getting pretty busy. And And I had been looking at other flight schools that I could train at, and I found a new flight school essentially. However, again, I told myself, trust the process, trust the process. I didn't want to force myself to make progress if I'm not ready, but I was upset because I had instructors telling me, hey, you're going to be ready for check ride before graduation. And and I really dove into my studies, worked hard for it, and so I thought this would happen very soon. And I also realized that training once a week, you're making such small progress, it virtually non-existent, and it wasn't the best chance for success. So on July 7th, 2022, I stepped foot into my new flight school that was also in Florida. It was about an hour and a half drive away. I was excited because I had graduated and now I could put all of my focus into flight school 100%, and I can train more days out of the week. I remember I had 3 flights with my instructor. He commended me on my skills and he was happy. And we did a cross country and he signed me off. And I was like, great. This is what I wanted, this is all what the patience and the process took, trust the process. I finally got to where I needed to be. And I felt as though I got over that hurdle and I was making progress again. So around this point, I had about 90 hours and still no private pilot's license. And it felt a bit frustrating because, I saw some friends, some peers getting theirs, and I know that you can get at 40 hours. And here I am at basically more than double, and I still don't have it yet, And I felt like I was putting in so much effort and just not getting it. But I told myself again, trust the process, right? I recognize I had a few hiccups along the way to keep me looking forward. I was flying around 3 times a week and spent most of my time studying at home, trying to learn and understand as much as possible. My instructor would even give me mock check rides for about 2 hours after our flying lesson, basically 3 times a week, and he would try to stump me. A lot of times he was able to, but he would go so deep into topic just to see where my knowledge stopped, and he wanted me to be as prepared as possible for the check ride. A few months passed and a few stage checks I went through, and it's now December. The school that I'm at now, it's a Part 61 school. So the stage checks aren't required, but I did them as checks, so for good measure. So it had been 5 months since being at the school, and I had loads of hours, and I wondered why I wasn't getting a check ride. I stayed patient and I trusted the process, but I was very introspective, wondered why it was taking so long. So on this day, December 9th, 2022, was the day I passed my private pilot check ride. It was one of the best days ever. It felt like all my worries and struggles paid off. It felt like the process was finally working. Once I passed, I went back home to the Bahamas 5 days later and stayed and vacationed for a little bit. And then around January 28th, 2023, it was my first introduction to IFR procedures and flights. I remember thinking around this time something was up because it had now been 4 months and it was April 2023. I was training 4 to 5 times a week and studying so hard. So I wondered if I was the issue in earning my instrument or was it the school? I didn't want to blame the school because I had the same issue with the previous school. So what's the chances of me getting a similar school, right? So I spoke with some of the students regarding the situation. I felt like instructors were purposefully delaying students. And to my surprise, students actually said, yeah, their instructor is just using them for hours and they constantly hold off on check rides so that they can milk them out of the hours so they can basically go to the airlines. And it made sense because I ended up seeing it, I also had an experience with a stage check instructor who failed me 2 times because I did a parallel entry instead of a teardrop entry, which he gave me factors where either teardrop or parallel would work. And he explained that because I was 3 degrees off, I should have used a teardrop entry, but I used a parallel. And I told him that I would have to maneuver the airplane to do a teardrop entry versus the parallel entry. And I had other students I asked, and they said that particular instructor failed them at least 2 times. Some even got failed 3 and 4 times, which is insane. And he was reported for this incident, actually, all these incidents that he had done. Now what happened after was this belief, talking to the students actually affirmed to me that this instructors were just using the students and they could care less about the students' careers. They didn't care about how much money we were spending. They're just like, yeah, let's just get the hours. The instructor I had would always skip ground lessons, and I would ask him many times, let's do a ground, so I could understand the material better. And he would just say, oh, just read your book. And I mean, I'm fine with being self-taught, but at the same time, I wanted to get the full use out of my instructor as much as possible. So most of my instrument training, I just taught myself, and I used the ACS, used other study material, and I found a lot of YouTubers who were giving a lot of good instrument ground training. Technically, I ended up saving money on ground training though, which helped. I kept trusting the process because I knew that in this career you shouldn't rush, but something still fell off about the situation. I knew some students who also started from 0 hours around July 2022, and who had been a student pilot around April 2023, and they've had around 100 hours. Still a student pilot, still there. I even know people now who started 2022 July, the same time I did, and they just got their private last year, like July, which is basically 2 years. Like, that is insane to me. And I've told them, like, leave the school, but it's not my business. So I remember one morning I woke up. I was off from training that day, and I kept thinking about the situation, and it was heavy on my mind, heavy on my heart, and I felt as though the school was taking advantage of me. And I called my mom just to explain what I was feeling, and she said she was actually thinking the same thing, and she was ready to call me and ask me what I feel about it. And I told her, hey, I'm going to be looking into this new school. It's called American Flyers, because I had known some people there, and I started flight school before them, and they were actually like done. And I'm like, okay. So my mom told me, hey, check out the flight school, tell me what's up, come back to me. So immediately I called American Flyers and I was like, hey, do you guys have a tour available? I then headed down, and it was about an hour and a half drive. The whole time I'm in deep thought, and I'm thinking, is aviation for me? Am I spending too much money? Am I the problem? Am I untrainable? What's wrong with me? Like, I'm trying to be introspective and see if I'm the issue or if it's something else. I'm wondering, why is this working out? I thought this would be much smoother. So when I arrived at American Flyers, I already knew I wanted to be there. They made you want to be there. They I don't know how, but they gave you FOMO. The space was like inviting. They looked organized. I talked to students. They were all happy to be there, and they felt good. They felt trained properly. I met with the chief instructor, went over my logbook. He wanted me to give a quote. Well, he wanted to give me a quote on my finish up training, because around this time I had about 200 hours. And he said, you have a lot of experience. And then he said, why are you doing the same approaches over and over and over, and you still haven't have your instrument rating? Like, what's wrong? And he said, looking at my logbook, he said, I feel as though your school is taking advantage of you and wasting your time. And I said, thanks, because I fully agree and felt the same way. And he said, by now you should have got your instrument, bro. Like, you're qualified for it. You have the hours, and I'm sure you have the knowledge ready to pass one right now. And I told him I'm sure I could pass one right now. So we went on a tour facility. He told me everything I need to know about the school, and I was sold from it from I went through the front doors. So he didn't really have to do that, but I was happy to see everything. I then called my mom, told her about everything, and she said, good, I trust you. Make the move, do what you have to do, finish up things, and begin moving to the school. And afterwards, I accompanied one of my good friends, Ethan, to get a tattoo, and then I headed back home. So I continued flying with our current flight school, because my instructor and we were doing time building. And then May 21st, 2023, after a cross country, I logged like 5.5 hours. I told him this is my last flight and I won't be training with the flight school anymore. And I explained that the training wasn't up to where I needed to be, and he asked me why I didn't say anything sooner. And I just wanted to leave that place. So I honestly didn't really feel welcomed in that place anymore. It just didn't give me the energy or the vibe that American Flyers gave. So July 20th, 2023, I started American Flyers. I felt so good to be there. I felt confident that I wouldn't have any issues because the instructors all were telling me, they were like, hey, I want you to succeed. I'm here for your career. I want you to continue to grow. And, basically he meant no slapping up. We're going to get you out of here, trained to standards, and on your way. And I love that. I'm like, great. I don't plan on staying here for too long. I have a goal, and I'm already approaching, at this point, I'm already approaching like 250 hours. I think I'm at like 220 or something like that. So I'm already at commercial standards already, so it should be very easy, right? So August 19, 2023, I had my instrument check ride. I flew over to Naples to take the check ride. The oral part went well. The DP had no issues with that. However, when we got into the air, the examiner, seeing this though, he was in a rush. He kept rushing me to do things, and even though I was not taking long at all, but he just seemed like he was in a rush. He just kept pushing me to be in a rush, and I was like, hey, slow down, where are we going? There's no rush, This is my time for my check ride. Let me do my thing. We departed Naples. He wanted me to track the 183 radial off of the VOR. So I tuned in Naples VOR, which is called Cyprus. So Cyprus VOR I tuned in, right? I told him the VOR is not working because I checked the NOTAMs and it was out of service. So but when I tuned it in, nothing, no green needles showing up. So I'm like, cool, it's not working. He told me it is. So I'm like, bro, what's going on? It's not working. And it confused me because I'm like, he's saying it's not working. Could he be wrong? And he seemed visibly upset. So I checked to see the issue. And then as I zoomed in, I realized the 183 radial was coming off of Fort Myers VOR, which is called Lee County. And he took the controls immediately and was like, you failed because you took too long and you put the wrong VOR in, the wrong frequency in. And I'm like, that is actually so dumb, because in real life, sometimes when you put the wrong frequency in and you just go back and double check and change it, that shouldn't be a cause for failure. It's not like I didn't know how to tune a VOR. I put in the wrong frequency and then I found the right one and you told me I failed. So I contested it for a bit, and he was like, no, it's a fail, and he said I took too long and he wanted to go home. So once on the ground, he told me that he chooses that VOR because if you look at it on ForeFlight, the Cyprus VOR looks like it has a 183 radial shooting off of it, and if you're flying and looking at your iPad, that will be confusing for the first time. And then he also told me that he gets a lot of failures from students getting confused on that. And it's not like you get confused. If you just glance at it, it looks like you will tune the wrong VOR. It's a simple mistake anyone can do. And he actually insinuated that he makes more money from doing that because he's intentionally failing people. And that sucks because they're playing people's careers now. And so, anyway, he also told me a story about how he failed his instrument check ride. So I was very upset about this because it wasn't ethical, and I'm sure it wasn't legal. And I told my instructors, they said it wasn't ethical either, and he was wrong for doing so. Again, upset at the situation because it felt like I prepared my best and wasn't enough. And so I told myself, trust the process, it'll work out. I'm too close to fail, right? I'm too close to give up right now, So then again, I tried again. I took it with the same examiner. Why I did, but I took it with the same examiner. I figured it should be easy after I we build a relationship already. I passed the check ride on September 2nd, 2023. The examiner told me, he encouraged me, and he complimented my skills. And I went on my way, went back to Pompano Beach. For my commercial check ride, I got back. Once I got back from Naples, I had about 2 days off, celebrated, and I got back into training for my commercial license. I'm not sure which day, but I think it would have been September 24th. I had my check ride scheduled. So excited, so happy, because I was making extreme progress, and it hadn't even been 3 weeks since getting my instrument reading. So I was like, great, I'll be fine, I'll be okay, you know. On this morning, I actually got up a little earlier. I stopped to grab some coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I had 3 shots of espresso, and I'll tell you why this wasn't a good idea. So once I got back to school, I was very jittery. I felt like I could have flown without a plane. It was crazy. I met the examiner, we did the paperwork. He said the oral exam should take 2 hours. I was like, cool. I have never felt so much confidence in my life about an exam. We started the oral, and I was just blurring out answers immediately after he asked them. And he was like, I see that you're excited and you know your stuff, but he told me maybe you should calm down a little bit. And I laughed. We both laughed, and we continued. We continued the check ride, the oral exam, finished it in about 50 minutes. We went through all the ACS and all the questions he had to ask. And honestly, he was shocked. He was like, okay, your plane's not going to be back for another hour and a half, so he just decided to teach me something. And we talked, and he shared some stories about him flying as a DP as well. And once the airplane was back, went outside, and the weather was abysmal. It was the worst weather I've ever seen. It was so bad. And I really wanted to go up, but I knew that was a hazardous attitude, and I knew that I should have just stayed and not go up. But I was like, man, I really want to get this done. I know I can get it done, regardless of the weather. But I made the best judgment, the most decent judgment, and I was just like, hey, I'm not gonna go up. I'm gonna discontinue, and I can just reschedule. So we rescheduled. And I told myself, hey, trust the process. We got the oral done, that's fine. Let's just trust the process and reschedule. It's fine as long as we're safe. Because what if I went up? He could have failed me because I chose to go up. So I rescheduled for October 4th, 2023. Went to the pre-flight, the examiner asked me a few questions. And started the airplane, went to the practice area. I did all maneuvers first try. The examiner was quiet the whole time, and when they're quiet, you're doing good. So I knew I was doing good. And he said, I saw no issues with your skills, you're a good pilot. We printed out my license. I went home and took the infamous post-check ride nap. On October 10th, 2023, I started my multi-engine training. I was flying a Piper Seminole. Very fun aircraft to fly, but because it was bigger, more expensive to train on, I tried to offset costs by using the free simulator provided by American Flyers, which I love to do. I took advantage of the simulator all the time. I made sure my procedures were down, single engine procedures, and memory items were down, muscle memory was good. I practiced and studied a lot in the sim. People told me that for multi-engine training, it would be the easiest rating to get. I didn't fall for their antics though, because I never wanted to get too comfortable. So instructors and other students told me that their orals took about 20 to 30 minutes, and then they flew and passed. And so I'm like, cool, mine should be about the same. But then on October 26th, to my surprise, the examiner drilled me for 3 hours on the Seminole. I didn't even know I had 3 hours worth of information in my brain, but somehow I made it through. And that it felt like he wanted me to fail actually, but I held my ground. We went up, we did the maneuvers, and we were doing the single engine approach. And now the examiner got mad at me and failed me because he said that I didn't put the gear down at the final approach fix. His argument was that in the airline industry, you have to put it down the final approach fix, which is true. However, we were flying general aviation airplanes. and we were also single engine, underpowered. It's a 180 horsepower airplane, one engine. Flaps were already introduced, and then if I dropped the gear down, our descent rate would have been awful. It would have been at least like 1,200 feet per minute if I added all of these drag devices out. So I chose not to, and in doing so, he told me that that's not what it does. That's not how you should do it, and the ACS says otherwise. The ACS actually says the gear has to be down before touchdown. So the gear was actually down before touchdown. It would have been down before touchdown, but he just did not. He did not get it. He flies 757s across the world, and I'm like, bro, we're flying general aviation, a Piper Seminole, very underpowered airplane. I don't know about you, but 757, really powerful airplane, can fly and take off on a single engine. This airplane cannot. I don't know if you got mixed up or twisted, or you didn't study, but yeah. So we had that discourse out, and then the chief pilots were mad with him. The instructors were upset with him. And again, this made me feel like I'm not a great pilot, even though I explained what I did. But again, I told myself, trust the process, trust the process. I was able to reschedule with another examiner on November 3rd, 2023. I explained the situation to him, and he did not agree with the previous examiner. He said, I don't agree with it, but let me finish you up so we can get home. I passed the check ride, and he was very excited because I was very excited because I get to go back home to the Bahamas and become a commercial pilot. So guys, trust the process. Even if you don't see the end, always trust the process. Now, I didn't introduce this flight, but now this flight is from Fort Lauderdale to Freeport. And thank you guys for joining me. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.